So I'm very happy that you've all joined me today. We are going to talk through presenting your fees and really focusing both on building your case in person and in proposals. And this is obviously a tough situation, your day-to-day battles to get proposals approved, whether it's project-based or retainer-based. Through my time working with clients like Taco Bell and T-Mobile, Washington's Lottery, I know firsthand it's an uncomfortable and it's a tough situation to be in as you're thinking about that day to day, and kind of going to battle is a good way to think about it. But today together, we're going to provide a few key principles that you can leverage to structure your fee proposals so that you can preempt these client tactics and secure higher fees and therefore more revenue, because we'll show you there are absolutely a standard set of tactics that both procurement and clients are using. So as Shelly mentioned, live tweet, please, when you hop on Twitter, use these hashtags, hashtag Mirren Live, hashtag 4A's webinar. I'd love to hear from you from that space. And then as well, if you'd like a printed handout, please email alicia@mirren.com. Again, I'll post this at the end, but if you'd like a handout, we're happy to send that to you after the fact. But let's dive in. Let's get rolling now on procurement and presenting our fees. Now, this is a quote that a procurement exec, it's rather controversial, made at our annual New Business Conference in New York. And it's hard to hear, but it seems to sum up the situation pretty well. He said, negotiating with agencies is like lambs to the slaughter. And that's tough, but keep in mind, procurement negotiates with all kinds of vendors. Their marketing partners are just one of many. They negotiate for software, for office supplies, etc. But we hear firsthand from them that agencies are their very favorites because we make it so easy on them. And there's several reasons for that. Agencies have become submissive. We're no longer driving the business, but following more as a do as we're told. We've become very reactive, again, reacting to versus leading. And as a result, clients' procurement, they're losing respect for their agencies. We've really put ourselves into subservient roles, especially when it comes to negotiating fees. I use this picture. You can guess who is who in this image. And part of that, too, it's in our DNA. As agency people, we try to be liked, even if it comes at the cost of being respected. And let's be realistic, there is a very real cost when you have lost respect. It's in our makeup as agency people. We genuinely like people, we want to be liked, but there is a very real cost that comes attached to that. So it's time that we take a stand, particularly when we're negotiating fees. We need to demonstrate the value that we bring. We've got to be bold, and we've got to command the respect that we deserve. So coming back to this quote, yes, it's alarming to hear, but what's important is that the same executive came back around and added this. He followed with, when you win, subject to negotiations with procurement, the momentum is all on your side. Our job is to make you think that it isn't. Now again, this came straight from the mouth of a procurement executive. The power is with us. It's their job to take that momentum, to take that power. The bottom line is we've got more power than we're led to believe. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through these principles together. So let's cover very quickly the agenda and talk about what we're going to discuss together. First, we're going to set the stage, really give you some information about the background and set the landscape, both getting to know your opponents, how they tick and how they think, getting to know what exactly it is that they're looking for so that you can deliver that and put your proposals through that lens. And then very specifically, we're going to outline their tactics and talk to you about how to counter, how to preempt those. From that, we're going to get into the resulting action plan. These are the steps and the tactics that you can use, starting with casting. Who is it that from your agency will negotiate firsthand with procurement? It may be a surprise, but that might not be the account lead. In this case, might not be the best person. How then do you tie your proposals to the client's business goals? If they take, you take. It's a common tactic to try to reduce scope, reduce fee and FTEs. How do you respond to that? And then increasing the scope of work detail, which works to decrease scope creep, which we'll talk through is another intentional client tactic. But first, let's get to know your opponent. Let's take a look at the procurement executive. Let's talk about their makeup versus the makeup of an agency exec. We look at procurement versus agency personalities. One, procurement, also client, they're very left-brained, very analytical. A typical agency executive is right-brained, very creative thinking. Procurement is all about routine and process and getting into kind of standardized. And of course, agencies, we're all about variety. We're constantly looking to innovate and to improve. Procurement is very numbers-oriented, very data-oriented versus kind of that gut instinct, that creative-minded agency. Procurement clients, they're all about science, it's plain, it's safe, as opposed to kind of embracing risk and uncertainty in order to bring forward new thinking. And finally, procurement operates to keep their power. They operate from a position of power as opposed to, within fee negotiations, the agency execs who really are operating from a place of fear. They've won the business in the RFP, now they need to secure the business and all of these pressures, and it's a very different place that they're coming from. And to summarize, really, for procurement, it's all business. And then again, it's a little bit different from us. But one thing to add to this, another way to look at this is when we give in to procurement, when we don't stand our ground within negotiations, we're actually introducing doubt and fear into our client team. Because this is another quote from procurement at our new business conference last year. This is a real fear that they have about us. They look at the way that we negotiate, or don't, with them, and then they translate that into how they think we'll negotiate on their behalf with our vendors. And it's not pretty. We actually are casting doubt with our negotiation skills when we aren't firm with our clients. So they're absolutely playing a game. They want you to think it's only about price, because then naturally you'll lower your price. Now, price, of course, plays a big piece of it, and we'll talk about that, but we've also got to consider the value. But they smell this fear, and they're conscientiously taking advantage of it through the tactics that they are using. So we're going to talk more about their tactics, but it's important to understand some of their training. Where are they coming from? How have they been charged to go forward? So I want to give you a few examples of the training that they have exposure to and that they're taking advantage of. So here we've got the Institution for Supply Management, and this is a conference that happens annually. It's just one of many summits that go on in the world of procurement. But take a look at this detail, this training. This is just one of many summits available. So let me read a quick description of what this covers. So they've got over 48,000 active members worldwide. It's the largest global organization dedicated to advancing the practice of procurement and supply management. ISM is the leader in supply chain, driving value to its members with its two widely renowned certifications, the Report on Business, countless educational resources, and extensive networking events around the globe. There is a big business in teaching how to negotiate. Here's an example of another summit, the Global Procurement Tech Summit, that's focused on giving the tools, the confidence, and the knowledge to lead negotiations. Let me just give you an example of one of the courses within the conference, to help again show the level of detail. This is a level of training all in order to get the lowest fees for the highest return out of their vendors. How many of us can say we've been trained in negotiating at all? Here's another example seminars and course, The Science and the Art of Negotiation, really to show you these guys are focused on the science. The science of negotiation, each program from 2 to 3 hours, each one. The science of negotiation includes instructions on the total cost of ownership, negotiation planning, concession behavior, win-win, and other strategies and tools and techniques used by the best negotiators. Part 2, the art of negotiation, includes speaking and listening communication skills, communication techniques, personality issues, and tactics and counter-tactics. Your opponent, and I use air quotes with that, but your opponent is well learned and well practiced, and they do this all of the time. So understand the playing field. In addition just to their learning, let's take a look at the code of ethics. These guys are well prepared. They've got tons of arrows in their quiver, but they can also be so unscrupulous that they have to agree to be honest in their code of conduct. So the American Purchasing Society advocates the following principles, serves to ensure public confidence in the integrity of purchasing professionals. Maintain loyalty to your employer. They have to sign that they will agree to that. Pursue your organization's objectives consistent with this code. Be honest. That's written into the black and white code of conduct. Refuse to accept gratuities offered by suppliers or potential suppliers. These personalities are well learned and they're sharks. You've got to know who you're dealing with. So further than that, let's talk about who they report to. It's not marketing. They may have you believe that, but they're working with marketing. They don't report to them. They're either going to report to purchasing or finance. Often they'll ladder up straight to the CFO. Both of those departments are very numbers focused. It's very focused on business results. Now, it's not a perfect world for them either. As many of us, they're feeling the pressure. Their pressures are really heavily about cost reduction. They're looked to optimize operating expenses, optimize working capital, increase profit. And this was an Aberdeen study that was done. And so really it is about the numbers. They are feeling the pressure. They're putting the pressure on procurement, which is then putting the pressure on us. And another important understanding about people's motivation is to think about how they're compensated. So let's talk a little bit about how procurement is compensated. On top of their base salary, many senior procurement execs are bonused based on expense reduction or cost reduction. Now, thankfully, in some cases, slightly, we're starting to see a shift that is not simply about cost alone, but it's shifting a bit to overall value. So value being the total return of what you get for the money you spend. It's much smaller, but there is a small shift. And this is really our opportunity to demonstrate our value. And we'll talk more about that. So ultimately, thinking about the pressure they feel and how they're compensated, what is it that they're looking for? What is it that they want? They want to feel the power, prove their worth, and justify their position. They want to be able to feel like they won the negotiation, because there is that sense of win and lose. This isn't a kumbaya kind of setting. It's all business. And we've got to understand price, cost cutting is still important. And this is really their end goal. This is how they're thinking about. But procurement is only one piece of the puzzle. It's also important that we look at the senior decision makers in marketing as another piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about their perspective. So from their perspective, client loyalty is back, which is surprising to hear, but there's a catch, because it's not to you. Clients are exceptionally loyal in today's world, but they're loyal to business performance alone. This is no longer a world driven by relationships. They'll be loyal to you as long as you can provide business results, as long as you continue to show business results. And they're starting to get faced with a number of agencies who are having these conversations and showing this focus. And so they're asking themselves, with a growing number of agencies that are focused on business impact, why stay with those who aren't? And they aren't staying with those agencies at all. The problem is they're saying to themselves, and this is the perspective of clients, agencies just don't understand our business. And that's really their sentiment. Now, perception versus reality, that's the perception. Agencies just don't get it. They're not talking about our business and they don't understand it. And of course, we'll say that we do. Absolutely. But before we jump kind of to that and say it doesn't apply to me, I want to set the stage and kind of show you where the bar is set. I want to define what it really means to understand a business and kind of show you where the client's expectations are. So thinking about then understanding your opponents, who they are, how they think, let's dig in next and talk through what it is that they want. I want you to get to know that so that we can address it. So when you say you understand your client's business, it's possible you're overstating the truth just a bit. We've got to dig deeper than what traditionally has been good enough, because it's not in today's world. So maybe we don't need to understand the business to the level of a Wall Street analyst, but a little bit deeper than you do now. And so to set the landscape, I want to take a look at where clients are focused when it comes to tracking their business metrics. We're going to go through a handful of KPIs across different categories just to show you a handful of what metrics clients are interested in. And this is just a sampling. But let's talk about a client within the QSR space. Think about the things that are important to them. Store traffic and guest count is important, even by day part. Table turnover, average check size, daily transactions, how many transactions happening every day, how many functions, maybe more so for a McDonald's than a Taco Bell, but how many function inquiries are coming in, and then how many of those are converting to actual booking. RevPASH, this is a huge one, revenue per available seat hour. This is probably one of the most complete and efficient metrics you can apply within the QSR space to improve revenue and profitability. And this metric alone incorporates sales measurement, seating efficiency, spend per head, resource allocation, all of these things to come together. So these are the kinds of things that clients are looking for. Comp sales being another big one. It's interesting, within categories, even sales alone, there's too generic. It gives you away as not really understanding that category, because comp sales compared to a month ago, year ago, other stores within the region, this is a huge one, more so than just sales. It's funny, there was a client at a conference recently who said, the second that my marketing firm talks to me about being results oriented and talks to me about the results, like getting results for their efforts, I know that they don't know what they're talking about, because that's not how we measure success. We don't say we're looking for results. We're much more specific than that. So even using language that's generic gives you away as not understanding the space. So kind of as a comparison, I want to go through two other categories, eye care and then airline, to show you like how different KPIs are across categories. Number of trials is something, total number of trials of pairs of lenses, number of fits. How many times have a pair of contact lenses been fitted for a patient? How many refits, how many scripts, how many prescriptions have been written? How many have been filled, share by type, whether daily, weekly, or monthly, and then franchise sales, sales by contact lens type, daily, weekly, or monthly. Again, very different than those KPIs within the QSR space. And then, as a final note, let's talk about the airline business impact and the KPIs that they would be looking for. RASM, revenue per available seat mile, CASM, cost per available seat mile, on-time percentage, ancillary revenue, number of flights, safety rating, load factor, how many total seats are on the plane and how many of them are filled. Just to show you, as metrics are getting more business focused and categories focused, you've got to get them more specific. So one way that we look at the agency landscape is your value being demonstrated in two ways. One, by the quality of your business building insights, and then here on the horizontal, the quality of your consumer insights. So as you think about your business building insights, how well do you know the model? How well do you know where your client will generate revenue? The competitive landscape. Can you demonstrate your knowledge in this space? And then with that, how well do you know your client's consumers? The insight that will drive them to action, how to motivate them to make a sale. And there's a divide in the industry world right now. There are a fair amount of agencies still operating in this lower quadrant. They're talking about soft impact kind of metrics. They're talking about awareness. They're talking about even brand reputation and click-through rates and engagement on social. And that is a highly commoditized space. those agencies are being rewarded with discounted fees because procurement is tearing them apart. They're able to devalue those services. But these agencies operating here in the upper right quadrant, who can demonstrate business building insight, who can demonstrate consumer insight, and then apply that to their work, they are the ones converting more business at premium fees. So we can't be focusing on these soft metrics, these soft objectives. We've got to be focused on the business objectives. And I want to put that a slightly different way by mapping it against the purchase path. So this is a super generic 101. We've got awareness, interest, desire, action, right? But from a client's perspective, you know, these agencies, most of them still operate just with awareness and interest. You know, those metrics alone, you can positively impact without positively impacting the business. So awareness as an end result, interest as an end result is no longer good enough for clients in today's world. They're really looking for those agencies who will help them generate desire and drive action, because they're thinking we've got low value on the bottom end and then high value here. So they're asking themselves, if you can buy this, and there are those agencies offering that in today's world, then why only buy this? All right, so I want to ask you guys a question as you're thinking about this and considering along this purchase path, you know, some of these metrics, awareness, click-through rates, or interest, or even those that you would follow with a brand tracker, you know, where does your agency focus most of its efforts in the purchase path? So we've got action, desire, interest, and awareness. Just interested in where your guys' focus is.
Okay, so the poll has been launched. We'll give everyone a couple of seconds to make their submission. And this is totally anonymous. We love your participation. And then when we have a good number of people participating, we'll close the poll and we'll share the results. But we'll give everyone a couple more seconds. Submit your answer. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in 3, 2, and 1. All right, Nadine, you have an interesting split here. So we had 40% say action, and the rest were 20% for desire, 20% for interest, and 20% for awareness.
Excellent. Yeah, that does happen, that we see it kind of across the board with that. You know, another thing that we see though is clients not necessarily rating their agencies as high as agencies will self-regulate. You know, it might be that we've got this in this case, but you know, we'll continue on together and think about that as we move forward. And then Shelly, just a quick question. Can you see my full screen again, or is it?
I see your slide screen. Okay, there we go. Now it's perfect.
Perfect, thank you. All right, that's interesting spread there. So let's take a step back then, particularly as this is how we're rating ourselves, and think about how senior clients view their business. You know, and one good way to look about that is to think about how Wall Street views a business. This is a good alignment with how clients look at business. Very numbers focused, very financial focused. So one thing to talk about is the institutional investor. It's almost like the ad age of the investing world. And this gives awards for category analysts. You know, here's some noteworthy achievement and some of the profiles that are highlighted. You see that people in Wall Street are focused on categories and being able to understand how businesses function. So here's a profile, Omar Effects, 32-year-old rising star on Wall Street, specialist in biotech, specialty pharma, you know, bachelor's degree in biology, Harvard master's in global health economics, so clearly well pedigreed. But Rafit offers the most complete, thorough, and timely analysis in the industry by far. He kept me out of more blowups and in more growth than everyone else combined. So this is a client of his and what they say about him. And I want to talk a little bit more when he's described as giving complete and thorough and timely analysis, and talk about kind of what that entails and what he does. So thinking about analysis, and the role that they have. They're managing accounts for their brokerage firms, but they're not just doing research and strategy, they're actually developing an articulate point of view and a rationale with very real financial consequences. Do you buy? Do you sell? Do you hold? There are real life implications to this. And in order to do this, they completely deconstruct the target business. They find out what is the business model, how well is it performing against the category, how well is it performing against the competitive, how is the target trending within this space. And in order to do that, they break out every business metric, financial metric, marketing, operations, all of these key performance indicators across the organization. And I'm not going to read all of these, but again, this is just a handful of the information that these analysts are digging into: market capitalization, P/E ratio, dividend rate per share, units sold. This is a comprehensive analysis of a client's business, and these clients keep in very close touch with Wall Street. So, the picture on the right here is just one page of a multi-page report. These are the reports that clients are studying. This is how clients define understanding their business. They predict the specific growth, the decline revenue for a business, and not just whether it will grow or decline, but why, the reasons thereof. They read these reports for themselves, for their competitors, the companies in their industry, and this is really their standard. So when we're talking about that purchase path, we're talking about action. It's to this level of detail when we're talking about knowing a client's business. So one way to change your focus a bit, one thing to do to start understanding the KPIs, to focus your activity on them, is to start with what we call the KPI exercises. There's 3 very easy steps to this. Before each assignment, go through these key steps. 1, identify the key category and the client challenges within your client space. Then go through and identify the category and client KPIs. What are those performance indicators, both those that you can impact, those that you can't, but what are the business and the marketing KPIs? And then finally, based on the above, what are the benefits that you provide? So, this really lays the foundation to ensure that we're being client-centric and avoiding kind of the typical agency metrics and agency goals. So all answers, must be in the vernacular, the language of the client as you're thinking about laying this landscape. So I'm going to quickly go through one example within the hospital space so that you can start to identify how you will do this for your own clients and prospects. So what are some of the challenges facing hospitals today, kind of across the landscape? We've got healthcare reform uncertainty, certainly top of mind in today's world. The challenges of specialized facilities, the need to build those out and then to differentiate. Decreasing reimbursements, the pressures of that. Decreasing patient volumes, patients delaying care. Shifts from inpatient to outpatient models. Differentiation across the densely packed competitive space. Keeping physicians happy and the turnover there. Internal politics, silos. These are just some of the challenges across business and across marketing facing hospitals today. So this is your first step. Identify the landscape, look at the challenges facing your client, but then from that, look to see where the business and marketing KPIs will be. So what kind of metrics are they going to be looking at? Patient volumes being an important one. Inpatient, outpatient, census, the percentage of beds that are filled. Care quality outcomes, net patient revenues, payer mix, referrals, how many people are referring the hospital to friends and family, are there awards and certifications that they have gotten? Again, this gets to be very category specific vernacular. And then finally, from that, the third piece of this exercise, one of the most important, is now to list out the benefits that you and your agency could provide a client within this space. So we always say a shortcut to this, start with the overall KPIs and then identify those that you can impact, because ultimately you won't be able to identify every single impact important to them. However, there are important metrics that you can impact, and this is where you identify those. So improve patient volumes, absolutely. Improve the payer mix, improve the differentiation, the preference, improve the referrals, help them understand some of the upcoming healthcare reform implications. All of these now get to be meaningful business impact KPIs. And this is where your focus needs to be. Right from the start, as we think about negotiations, as we think about proposals, the story has to begin at the front. It doesn't just get to be that you demonstrate your value when you start having those money conversations. It starts right from the start, and this gives you that focus right from the start to be demonstrating and aiming for real impact. But again, and just one example to sort of illustrate again across industries how different it is, you go through a gaming and casino business impact, it's a completely different set of metrics. Traffic to the gaming floor, tabletop, table game drop, slots handle, what is the revenue for the slots? Hold percentage, how much the casino gains from a game being played by players? House edge, players club rate, GGR, gross gaming revenue. We always talk there's bonus points for acronyms. I always love talking with clients of our own different agencies where they know the business and talk about it with so many acronyms that I've got to go back and Google because there's something about that insider language, and it shows when you know the inside track. So again, what clients are looking for, they want an agency partner who's in it with them. We're in this together. They've got 3 measures: sales, sales, and sales. Clients want their agencies to understand this. Oftentimes there is that divide that agencies have different priorities. Clients are looking for agencies to share their priority. My job is to use marketing strategy to drive sell-through. It's all about contribution to sales, contribution to profits. They're focused on the financial performance of the company, and they're looking for us as their agency partners to be able to help them in that pursuit. But I do want to say there is a slight difference when you're thinking about KPIs. Procurement's going to look at it a little bit differently than marketing. And really it comes to the idea of value. So procurement is thinking, how inexpensively can I achieve the KPIs? How much can I do that? But both are important, the cost, but also the achieving of the KPIs. So it's not just cost alone. But then marketing is looking at this as, well, how well can my marketing strategy achieve the KPIs? So there is a slightly different perspective. You've got to kind of understand how that plays together as you're navigating your negotiations. So time for another question. As you're thinking about that, we saw 40% agencies report of our attendees that they are kind of focused on that action. So now the next question that I have for you is, how effectively is your team tying that output to client business impact? So if you're aware of it and operating in that space, would you say 1 to 5 not at all, or very effectively are you tying your output to client business impact in your presentations and your proposals?
Okay, awesome. So the poll has been launched. Everyone knows what they have to do. I see people already submitting, which is awesome. We'll still give everyone a couple seconds to think of your answer. If you're in a big group by chance, maybe just talk to your neighbor, get a sense for the room, what you guys think the answer is, and then submit as one whole team. Okay, I'm going to close the poll then in 3, 2, 1. All right, let's check out the results here. So we have a 40% split between 2 and 3, and 20% say 4.
Thank you for that, Shelley. And that is something, again, we do see spreads happen pretty often, and half the battle is really able to tie that overtly. We talk sometimes that we don't get the credit that we deserve because we're not pulling it forward into the conversations as we should. So I think that's absolutely an opportunity to continue overtly with that focus of dialing that in to your presentations and to your proposals. So moving along, one of these things, and this isn't a formal exercise, but as you guys are kind of listening in, I want you just to spend 30 seconds and jot down on a previous pitch, what business opportunity could you have more overtly focused on? Was there something that happened recently or even a client proposal? Just to start to think about and document those things so that you can be more overt about that focus moving forward. It's easy to stick to client brief exactly as written, but it's important in our efforts, whether with current clients or potential new ones, to really keep the focus on the business metrics no matter what the brief says. We see a lot of poorly written briefs, but that no longer lets an agency off the hook from delivering the more important impact. So think about that, kind of back in a previous pitch, what you can learn from that to then pull forward. But that's a little bit about the background. Let's talk about their tactics now. You kind of understand where they're coming from and what they're looking for, but what is it that they're using in order to get those costs down and get the impact up? So when you're thinking about procurement, their first out of the gate mode is to set the stage. And they do this several ways. Again, they want to position themselves as the power play. So they block access to the real decision maker. Often they will try to call themselves the decision maker. 99% of the time, they are the influencer. But they're going to block that access, give themselves fabricated authority, and make it seem like they are the ones making the decision. That isn't the case. They'll often block access to information, block access to the truth. Again, this gives them the advantage because information is power. And they want to keep the power in their hands. So they set the stage, and then they follow a very specific script. Make the supplier believe it probably won't work out. How often have you been in an RFP situation where you get this and you win the pitch and you're feeling so great, and then immediately your first call with procurement is like, ooh, yeah, so I know that you heard. However, they purposefully cast that doubt in order to introduce fear. Another standard tactic, never accept the supplier's first offer, never. Now, I was guilty of this all the time, going in with either renewing contracts or within a pitch, going in with my best offer first. And absolutely, I thought, you know what, I'll get all the discounts out of the way, I'll cut this process short, I will go in with my best offer, and then we'll just get it signed and go. It never mattered how low my fees would be. They would always come back and ask for more. So understand that your first offer will never be accepted. You could go in and do it at a 50% discount. You could probably go in and do pro bono, and they would say, well, but we're going to need a little bit more. So understand they will never accept your first offer. It just won't happen. So don't go in with your very best right out of the gate. Often we see this, we actually have seen this firsthand from agencies who have dealt with it. They will compare the supplier to fake pricing models in inaccurate comparisons. So again, it doesn't really matter what size of agency you are, where your pricing comes in, you will always hear that you are one of the most expensive options. Now, actually, there were two sister agencies that had pitched against each other, and procurement told each of them, and they kind of know where the prices were coming in, procurement told each of them independently that they were way higher than the competition. And they knew firsthand this wasn't the case. So absolutely, compare the supplier to fake pricing models. This kind of gets back to blocking access to information. Very often they will say, you're coming in higher than market rate. Well, if that's the case, you can ask them for their data, ask them for their information. If they're going to try to claim, that there is a non-disclosure, well, they can redact all of the necessary information. Very often they will not come forward with that information because it does not exist. Another one, there are too many people in the supplier staffing plan. Doesn't matter how big, how small your team is. Again, that kind of comes under the never accept the supplier's first offer, but immediately they're going to start to look to see where they can reduce. And this is a big one, and this is a tough one to counter. They don't provide the budget. And that absolutely is a negotiation advantage for them. They've got the knowledge is power. So they'll want all of the services that you have provided, but you don't have a leg to stand on when then they say, "Ooh, you're actually just about 15% above our top end budget." Well, if you don't know the budget, you can't navigate accordingly. You know, another tactic, very common, is scope creep, and it's not an accident. It will seem that way, and then you'll feel very reactive about it, like, ooh, how did we get ourselves into this situation? It is premeditated. You know, clients procurement purposefully leave out detail from the scope doc, knowing that they can begin to fit more things in. You know, we see this one a lot too. More suppliers is more price competition during the pitch. They actually want to pitch agencies against each other in a pretty significant way, understanding that they alone will be the benefactor of that. And unfortunately, we see even more that there are more suppliers during the ongoing relationship. They've got more roster agencies. Again, they feel as if we're fighting for a dinner with a bunch of different agencies. We'll work harder and do more for less. This is all industry standard. This is not the exception to the rule. This is the rule. These are tactics that procurement is knowingly taking in order to give themselves the advantage. And those are just the basics. So let's go through a few more specific examples of other tactics that you'll see. Delay the negotiations. This is a big one. They don't give you a lot of transparency about timelines, and then every step along the way, they'll push out negotiations, understanding that the closer we get as agencies to needing to start the project, the more desperate we'll be, the more willing we'll be to compromise. Knowing that the second too, we spend a single hour working on a project before the contract is signed, absolutely reduces our willingness to fight for our fees. It's the first place to compromise because we get more desperate the closer that we get. You know, again, they position themselves as a final decision maker. They are influencers. They do not report to marketing. They report to finances, and they are not the final decision maker. It is not their budget. It is marketing's budget. Here's another one that we see a lot, even within the meeting. Oh, we've got to leave early. So maybe you've got an hour scheduled or even two, and then for some unexpected reason, they've got, 10 more minutes, but then we've really got to wrap this up. You know, they put that undue pressure on the agency, knowing it introduces uncertainty, kind of gets you off of your game. So in this, you know, stick to the schedule. Remember, they do not have the power. You've got the power going into this. Reschedule the meeting if necessary. Do not let them rush you out the door. Another one we see, and you know, these are easy tactics to employ, but very, very influential within the process. You know, split up your team. So let's say you've got 2 or 3 negotiators going into this. You set up a meeting for next week. You give them 4 time options. Well, of course, the one that they come back to is outside of those 4 options you've given them. They do this on purpose. Understanding divide and conquer, right? If they can split up your team, again, it gives them the advantage. So in this, stay firm and reschedule as necessary. The mad scramble. Oh my gosh, I saw this one all the time. It's, again, a tactic to keep you off balance. So within the process, they'll introduce new steps, you know, new requirements, and all of it, of course, is due on a very quick deadline. So reference checks have been introduced into new vendor relationships, credit checks, you know, and you don't hear about these until you're exactly on deadline, and it gets you off your game. So all of these last minute asks are intentional in order to keep you off balance. So remember this, it's not personal. They're following a script. You know, sorry, it's not going to work. You know, they're not going to let you get access to the real decision maker. They're not going to provide you that budget on the upfront. You've got to be prepared to engage in these tactics. You've got to understand them and know that this is how you've got to operate and navigate through, or don't, but then you're going to have to pay the consequences for that. So one thing they are clients, and it's not that we have to conform and give in to clients, but you've got to understand the landscape, and if this is how they are, this is not changing, so you've got to be able to navigate this landscape. Being prepared for the game gives you the ability to convert more business, and then you don't have to simply live with the fees that they're proposing. So everything they say and do, I cannot say this enough, is part of the game, and it's all designed to methodically reduce your power in the process. So now that you understand what you're up against, and it's formidable, but this is when you can put your action plan in place. And step one of your action plan is really to think about who is best suited, who is best built to negotiate with procurement. You can't just take for granted that it's the account lead. And it was always my job as the account lead to navigate procurement, but I was not trained in that way. I was not well experienced at negotiations. And frankly, I was a very accommodating personality that was not best suited. So it's not always the account lead that should be negotiating. In fact, often cases it isn't, because that tends to muddy the day-to-day relationship. The account team is trained to accept client requests, convey lots of information, ensure everyone is happy. Our metrics are client satisfaction, but these are counterproductive to negotiation trades, which have their own very different metrics. Think of casting on the client side. It's little emotion. It's all business. Go back to those personality traits that we mentioned. It's not going to change, so you want people who can manage with that approach and counter that. So if you're not personally prepared to adjust to this personality style, you're casting CFO, the attorney, the internal procurement strategist, business affairs, these are the types of departments within an agency that are better suited to handle contract negotiations. Think of them as the same type of people as procurement. So you should ask yourself, each time you go into negotiations, who should be in the room? And then consider that, because again, it's not necessarily the account lead that is going to be your best and your strongest negotiator. So just a question as you're thinking about this now, I'm interested in how effectively would you say your team negotiates with clients and procurement? So again, scale of 1 to 5, 1 being on the low end and 5 on the high end, how would you rank your team?
Okay, great. I see tons of answers coming in, which is awesome. Thanks, guys, for getting involved in this poll. Just a couple more seconds for any last-minute people who want to submit. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in 3, 2, 1. All right. So Nadine, the results are 33% say 2 and 67% say 3.
Yep, that's totally what I would expect to see. And that's fair, because we don't always go in intentionally thinking about who is best suited or how should they be trained. So again, happy that you are all joining me today and hoping that we are learning some tactics together to get those numbers up to 4s and 5s. So then moving right along, that second action, right? Thinking about first who's in the room, who should be negotiating, then how we can better tie our efforts to the client's business goals and really be able to articulate that business impact as we're thinking then about commanding a higher fee for our efforts. So we're going to go back to the KPI exercise for this. Think about the category, the client challenges, think about the client and category KPIs, and then based on the above, what are the benefits that you provide? Within all of this, again, the key is answering these challenges, the KPIs from the perspective of the client, not the agency. But we're going to take it a step further now and use this even further to establish your credibility and tie this now to your output. So one of the big pieces of negotiation, you're talking about your agency capabilities, you're talking about your agency services. I want to show you how you can take those service offerings and then tie them to client benefit. So think about this. When you list your service offering, very typically it's, here's my research, here's production, here are all of these things. But list this out, and then importantly, connect that to the category benefit or the KPI that each of these services would impact. And we'll show you how to do this. So this is even a two-step process, right? List your service offering and then list the benefit that that provides. So let me go through a little bit of how this would be. We dig in with your business. That is an agency cliche that we hear across the board. But how would you tie this back to business impact? Well, something like, we start by understanding the specific KPIs that drive your business and marketing, KPIs such as, again, contact lenses, number of trials, number of fits, franchise sales. All of our marketing is then laser focused on achieving those most meaningful metrics. Something about, we understand your audience. We hear this a lot, but using our extensive knowledge of your target audience and your category, we segment your target audience with the goal of identifying your highest value leads. So it's just a matter of taking those services and taking those capabilities and tying them to meaningful goals. We're fully integrated. How does this then tie to client impact? Focus specifically on your category. We provide a range of marketing services, all focused on achieving the KPIs, ... So it kind of goes on this way. We have years of experience in your category. I see this in a lot of capability decks. 30 plus years, 25 plus years, Another way to put this, we have years of experience and we have achieved growth in inbound inquiries, occupancy rates for the hotel industry for years. Again, everything ties back to business impact. We're different. Okay, that one was kind of a trick. There's no benefit of the statement. If you really have to tell people you're different, you kind of have to ask yourself whether you really are. But research, we uncover the specific consumer insights that can be leveraged to drive your inbound inquiries, your bookings, your spend per stay. Analytics, based on analyzing the key data, we identify the most important implications and actions you must take to achieve your occupancy growth objectives. Segmentations, we segment your audience with the goal of identifying your highest value leads. Even mobile, when you're thinking about different services, we generate new leads for you by reaching people in the right context of the moment they're in, encouraging and facilitating an immediate purchase. All of this language is much harder hitting and much more meaningful than when you get to writing the proposals. Project management, which is probably one of the most internal facing kind of departments, often aren't even client facing, but we optimize your production, spend, and budget. Even that is tied to a specific business impact. So some agencies will think of digital as a specialization. We saw mobile. I have to say, this is way too broad now. It's almost like saying we specialize in marketing. You've got to think about what area of digital, what benefits. Let's look about how clients are looking at digital. What types of digital shops are clients hiring? So, with this, the SOTA report, how do you structure your digital marketing assignments between agencies with a roster? This is one of the more prevalent ways of handling this. This was a great, from Mondelez, comment that we got. Digital didn't make one new channel. It created thousands of new mediums. It is just not possible for one agency to be expert in all of these areas. So again, clients are hiring specific digital category experience. Through all of what we're saying, specificity is key. If you're overly generic, it gives you away as not being an expert within that space. So through this exercise and by correlating your work directly to business impact, you completely transform your negotiations with clients and procurement. The frame of reference in this case is benefits, not services. And as I said just a few minutes earlier, it's not just at the fee negotiation that you should start telling the story. You should start right from the start. This should permeate your proposals, your written submissions, even at your initial response to that RFP. All of these responses need to focus on the benefits you bring, because that's when you start to bring value into the equation. And if you're just starting to have those value conversations at the point of negotiations, that's too late in the process. You know, start them earlier on, bake them into the story that you tell, and that makes it difficult for procurement to eliminate line items that have value. So again, we're moving away from cliches. It's not about the agency. We're not, independently held and operated. Well, no, it's not. That's about you. This is about the benefit that you provide for your client. So make it about the client and be brief. Focus on the business opportunity, talk about the business challenge, and focus on both. So no matter how simple the question, always look to communicate the benefit you offer, whether it's a question about service, FTE, or what. The frame of reference has to be benefits. And again, each step in the pitch process is a form of negotiation. So the story should be consistent, not just starting at the negotiation stage. Again, you start there, you've started too late. So ultimately, you've got to start from the very start to lead up to those fees you want to be able to charge. Proposals and questionnaires need to be concise and to the point. They've got to be able to communicate complex, bulky amounts of information more visually. And they've got to make it fast and easy to get to the most important information. You think about clients as they're responding to RFPs, they're often getting 6 to 8 90-plus page documents of written materials. They've got to be able to slog through all of this, make it easy for them to get to the most important information, that being the client benefit. So I want to switch gears a little bit as we're getting into a little more detail and look at some typical fee proposals. Look at the way that they're typically handled, and then we'll show you a better way to tackle them. But some typical fee proposals, really just like shopping lists, right? Like Bond Street Agency as an example. Work will be completed on a time and materials basis at the following hourly resources rates. And it's just, there you go. There's your menu. Client Services Director, here's your hourly rates across the board. It's very generic. A lot of times we just see the shopping list, but it's just cost focused. What does that actually mean? What does that actually get you? None of that is spelled out in the way that this is laid out. Here's another typical example. It's really just a description and a price tag. Now this is talking about phased pricing, right? So I'm sure there's some blended hourly rate here, initial discovery phase, 2 weeks, 15 hours, strategy phase, but again, there's no benefits. So procurement looks at this and is like, well, the discovery phase, I mean, what is that? Do we need it? I don't know, but that looks like a good place to cut. It's harder to rationalize. Presenting it this way is really just presenting from a cost standpoint, particularly as anybody can do the math and see, all right, well, if the initial discovery phase is 3,600 and we've got 2 weeks, 15 hours, they kind of come up with this blended rate, but there's no context for it. Even when you get into this rate schedule, when you're thinking now scope of services, digital services are $175 per hour, video editing is $200 per hour, it's easy to chop away at this. It is just services, just cost-based, there's no benefit. And procurement loves this because they're all about cost cutting. So what in that says, can we cut 15% off of research services because out of our budget? Like there's just no there in order to have a meaningful conversation. Now, here's a little bit more detail of a staffing plan, right? So Client Services Director, you get one of those for your account, and the Content Strategist, you get one of those, 25% of a Content Director. But again, it's still not connected to benefit, so it's easy to try to make cuts. So that's typically what we'll see, this shopping list guide. What I want to show you is a different way to approach it. So, here's a typical presentation of a role, and it again opens up a question whether it's needed or not. But then think about it this way. Think about describing this management supervisor position. The dedicated QSR account lead that will direct our entire team and be accountable for the rate increase objectives. That should be comp sale increase objectives. You describe it that way, and then there's a clear benefit. There's a clear premium that you can charge thinking about that. So that ties directly to a specific benefit. If procurement wants to come in and say, do we need the management supervisor? Yes, they are accountable for the comp sales increase objectives. That is their accountability. So if you want to cut that role, that is the benefit that you will cut. Think about this as an example with services, inbound marketing program services. If you just say that at that, there isn't a lot of context there. But when you talk about it in these terms, inbound marketing program services, the strategy and execution that will be developed to drive new form submissions for your dealer sales teams from an automotive space. Well, what could you charge by bringing more value to the equation? So if you are seen as a specialist or an expert, you can charge more, and that's when you're not easily replaced by a competitor because they can't devalue your service offering and they can't claim that you're not differentiated from your competitive set. So it gets you out of that competitive space. This is really tying to benefit that gets you those premium fees. So another question, how consistently would you say your agency focuses proposals around client benefits, specifically within the proposal state as we're thinking through FTEs and costs and fees?
I'm going to give everyone a couple more seconds to fill out the poll. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in 3, 2, and 1. All right, let's see the results. So we have 20% say 2, 60% say 3, and the rest 20% say 4.
Yeah, that's great. I see, opportunity there, and truly being able to tie to benefit is where we see higher margins and higher returns. So it's great to see that there's some, room to go, and you'll see that as you are able to do that, your fees and your margins will follow. And again, we talk about it's not necessarily rebuilding agencies or building out new capabilities. It's really being able to articulate and to package what it is that we do in order to get credit for the benefit that we're already providing. So then coming to our next point, the next action to think about, if they take, you take. Because as we talked, one of the ways that they set the stage immediately is to try to reduce. So what do you do in this situation? The Lord shall taketh away, procurement shall try to taketh away, and so shall you. I want to show you how to do this in a meaningful way. And again, it's tied back to putting each proposal, each line item to a KPI. Because if you tie them to a client benefit, then there's a clear give and take structure. Use a management supervisor example, responsible for increasing comp sales. Well, if they want to remove that role, you remove the benefit. This fundamental shift is what allows you to have meaningful give and take conversations. If the client removes a line item, you remove the KPI. The goal here is to achieve the KPI, not just a service account. It's not just, you're going to get 1,000 hours. It's to achieve a KPI. So it changes the frame of reference for these negotiations. So if the client wants to remove a staff member, again, you remove the KPI or the deliverable. You're selling the benefit and the KPIs within this proposal and not just the man hours. So as always, the goal is to achieve the KPIs, sell that benefit. Again, thinking about an assistant account executive. Well, just as stated, $85 an hour, it opens it up to question. They say, maybe we don't need that support. Well, the account executive is a team member accountable for budget tracking, for production schedules and status reports to ensure maximum efficiency of your production spend. Suddenly, that is no longer a cost-cutting decision to make. And I have to say, this is what we hear specifically from procurement, because it's one of the biggest pushbacks that we get. Well, no, they're going to want to cut anyways, and it isn't going to matter. They're unwilling to give up on benefits. So when you can spell out those benefits, that is where you counter this. It's all about tying the FTEs, the hours, the services to that benefit, so that when they try to eliminate any of those things, you can speak to them about the benefit that will go with that, and that counters that tactic. And then finally, we want to take a look at increasing the detail in your scope of work, really eliminating or reducing scope creep. I want to show you how actually scope creep can be a revenue opportunity. Because if you can make your scope of work more detailed, if you can write it specifically, you can counter this tactic. So the more detail, the more black and white scope creep becomes. You know, scope creep is an intentional tactic on clients' ends. They use it to their advantage. You can counter it with detail. You can identify more quickly when scope creep occurs if you've laid it all out in detail ahead of time. And actually, it really depersonalizes that conversation. It eliminates any sort of assumption or misunderstanding by spelling it out in black and white. Also including backup clauses and fees specifically for scope creep depersonalizes a conversation, counters that tendency. You know, here's one example that we used. You know, we include a catch-all will be priced at $200 an hour with a minimum of 50 hours for all other projects. You know, if they want you to do something that hasn't been explicitly spelled out in the contract, you've got a place now written into your scope that covers the work. So there is no ambiguity, which I will say, speaking from experience, really helps with the relationship. Some of the hardest conversations that I had in my advertising career were about whether or not a service was within scope. So I learned very quickly to write very detailed scope of works at the start of projects, you know, including an assumptions category, so that if this assumption does not come to be true, then you can reevaluate. Put that detail into it. You know, again, it depersonalizes a scope creep. You can refer back to the document and do it immediately. This isn't something that you want to avoid or postpone having tough conversations about. The sooner that you can nip something in the bud, the longer. In the same token, if clients are going to be on the hook to pay for something, they want to know before versus after. So don't avoid these kinds of conversations. Go back to your documentation and go there very quickly. You know, and don't back down on this one. It becomes more and more difficult for you to say no if you haven't addressed it from the start. So, you know, you might hear this, but the response is great. You know, the line item really protects both sides because it sets expectations accordingly. You know, you might hear, well, you're saying there will be no scope increase, so this will be a non-issue to include, so we don't need to include it. But don't back down. If it's going to be a non-issue, all the better then to include it. And that can be a very fair counter to say, great, we're probably not going to need this clause. We're going to keep it in, but it's going to be a non-issue, so it won't matter if it's going to be in or to be not. This will protect you in the long run. And an important factor of this as well is it turns scope creep into a revenue opportunity. So not only then are you not over-delivering and not getting paid for it, you're actually able to overextend and to generate new revenue from these clients. So, you know, based on your experience with the type of clients you have and the type of work that you do, you know, think about some of the typical scope creep items and projects are. There's an easy, you know, starting point for this, but bucket them by scope, by fee required, and then just list this to your agreement. You know, one of the best ways of learning is to document actually what you've encountered already and then prepare for that in the future. You know, and there's an easy starting point for this. Additional rounds of revisions. Often, you know, clients will, in our minds, we write hours based on 3 rounds of revisions or 2. And then by the time we get up to round 7, 8, 23, with our clients, we realize how many hours have been spent without being compensated. You know, think about additional versioning, particularly with the out-of-home space, or when you're thinking about kind of converting the national campaigns to franchisee needs in local markets. Resizing, you know, the need for internal client videos, which often just get asked for last minute, and oh, you could, you know, throw that in, and it's just a small ask. All of those tend to add up over time. Language translation is another big one that we see. But, you know, bucket these items. Think about the scope, think about the fee that required, and then just add it as standard language to your agreement. I worked with the lottery in Washington State, and often the biggest one that I encountered was as we have new products on the market for, a scratch ticket was typically a market for 2 or 3 months. Often we'd get asked for new game logos as part of the advertising efforts. And I'd written a scope about, this many advertising campaigns annually per fiscal year. But I learned after my first partial year from that, and then in following fiscal years, that was a great revenue opportunity for us. So just, think about the kinds of things that you encounter, bucket those out, and then write those into your standard scopes. But I'm also interested as well, across your agency overall, how often do you experience scope creep? Is it never, infrequently, half the time, most of the time, or every time? Interested in where your experience is.
This is our final poll of the webinar. I'm already seeing some responses coming in, which is awesome. Just give everyone a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll in 3, 2, and 1. Right. Final results for the webinar. So for this poll, we had 67% say half the time, and 33% say most of the time.
Yep, you are not alone, and I think that indicates that. So then I want to just go through a recap of some of the key points as we are rounding the corner. As you're thinking about writing proposals and negotiating with procurement, know the landscape, get to know your opponents, how they operate, how they're wired, look for what they want, which, spoiler alert, it's business impact. They want value and they want a return for their investment. And then get to know the tactics that they use to drive costs down, the delay tactics, splitting up the team, putting you in a position of fear. Like, understand the landscape and then respond accordingly. Because once you've got the background, that's when you can set the action plan into place. Think about casting. Who's the right personality to be negotiating? Again, it's not always the account lead, and oftentimes it isn't. Focusing on the benefits adds value to your services, to your team. If they take, you take. The easiest way to counter this is tying your person, your services to a benefit. So when they try to cut the service, the FTE, you can cut the benefit and eliminate that reduction. And then preempt scope creep by adding detail to your scopes. Add a catch-all clause. It depersonalizes the situation and becomes then a revenue opportunity for your agency. So think then about your approach. Think about what you can learn from prior negotiations and then apply future forward. And a few other closing thoughts just to think about, and this is really an interesting one when we're talking about maintaining your power. The momentum is on your side, and how do you keep that? Now, I wanted to leave you with this. Before even beginning the negotiations, you want to be able to set some ground rules. Remember, you be bold, you have the power, and they'll respect that. But present them. This isn't a inflexible deal breaker. This isn't a diva kind of moment. Present them from the perspective of procurement while establishing your own boundaries. Show empathy and show boundaries and put it through the benefit to them, but establishing your own rules and what will work for you. Include the rules they'll want, along with the rules you'll need to protect yourself. This isn't, again, you going in and being overly demanding and unreasonable. You're demonstrating empathy. You're proving that you understand their objectives to soften them up for the rules that you need. So it's possible, and it's totally recommended as an establishing conversation. Here's just a sample script. Before we begin, let's confirm some guiding principles for the process. Let's be sure we're all on the same page. Ensure this is as productive as possible for both of us. Again, think about their makeup. They're very process-oriented. They're very risk-adverse. You put it through their perspective, want to make sure that we're all on the same page, get us moving together in the same direction, make sure that we're aligned on this process. Absolutely gives it to them in a way where you understand where they're coming from and are thinking about their best interest. So some of the other rules of engagement that you can think of, these are just a sample set. Go through, customize for your agency. But it's absolutely fair right from the onset to make sure there's clarity of business objectives and business outcomes. What is the client expectation? What is it they're looking to accomplish either through the project or through the relationship? Make sure that that is very clear across teams. Transparency of fees. This is a big one in the agency landscape, but making sure that those fees are transparent for both parties. Transparency of the scope, again, more detailed the better, but ask for that transparency. Ask to make sure that you're on the same page. Fair value. That's a very fair ask. Fair price for achieving objectives. And remember, if they're going to say that you're coming in high based on some industry data, ask for that information. They can redact the information. They should absolutely be able to share it to you. What are the benchmarks based on identical agencies, identical scopes of work? Ask for the information. Ask for that transparency. And then increase, decrease in scope. Increase would equal an increase and a decrease in the fee. One should go with the other. This is a big one too, the negotiation timetable. As we think about delaying tactics or introducing the mad scramble or some of these other things, there should absolutely be transparency and agreement as to when decisions need to be made by and what that timing looks like. This is a great way on the upfront. Ask for that process, ask for that work back schedule, and then you should be able to identify and preempt any of those, and I'm using air quotes, surprises along the way. So that's just a short list of different asks, very reasonable to make on the upfront of negotiation. Think about more. Think about, again, what you've dealt with in your own past negotiations and then what would benefit you in the future. And for these rules of engagement, document them down. You don't want to go back to the drawing board every single time you come into a new negotiation tactic. So jot them down and understand you've got this as a good starting point as you bake out your negotiation process itself. And that's it as we're talking about proposal writing and presenting your fees. One last thing to mention before I hand over for questions to Shelley. We have, if you're interested, a training workshop coming up in late January and early February in Miami, hosted at Crispin & Porter, and LA hosted at RPA. 2 days on agency strategy, 2 days on organic growth, both focused on account teams. We've got some people signing up for both or one or the other. The goal in this to turn your account teams into business partners for your client, which is becoming so critical in today's world. So if you want any more information, mirrengrouptraining.com. As I promised, the email again here, if you'd like a printed handout, we are happy to send that out this week, alicia@mirren.com. And with that, I turn over for the last few minutes if there are any questions, Shelley, that we can discuss together.
Awesome. Thank you so much. A huge thank you first to Nadine for taking us through almost 90 minutes of content. Some fantastic insights. I hope everyone is walking away with some good tools. But again, this is your chance to get any clarity or maybe ask some questions that wasn't reviewed in this session to ask now and pick Nadine's brain. So how to do that? Well, as mentioned before, there is a question box in your go-to panel. This is where you can type in any question that you have. Again, this is your chance to get some more clarity. So I'll be keeping my eyes out in that section. Definitely send us through some of your questions. We have a few minutes left for those. So I see questions already coming in, so I'm going to get right to it. Nadine, does procurement treat other industries the same way they treat agencies?
That is a great question, and the answer is yes. Yes, absolutely. The scripts, the tactics are consistent across the board. I think that in other industries, the deliverables are a little bit more black and white. Within the creative industry, there's a little bit of that zhuzh, you know, that if you're selling, let's say, paper clips or office chairs, it's much more straightforward. But they treat the other industries exactly the same way. It's the same process, the same scripts. If anything, we're easier targets for them, but their tactics have not changed. This is something that is absolutely across the board, which I think is great because it takes some of the personal influence out of it. It's like, oh great, this is exactly standardized. I'm not going to take it personally. This is just a landscape. I think that's in a way very freeing for agencies knowing to go into negotiations.
Awesome. Our next question was if you could friendly remind everyone the email address that people can email to get a copy of the deck. Do you mind just going back? Yeah, maybe we can stay on this slide.
Yep,
so if anyone wants to go down.
Alicia@mirin.com.
Awesome. So we'll just keep this slide up for anyone who wants to take some time to jot that down. This is the main person you reach out to get a copy of the handout. All right, I'm going to keep going with some more questions that are coming in. What about clients that don't have KPIs, or at least any that we've seen?
You know, it's a whole other topic, but one interesting thing that's happening in the world today is clients are getting busier, and these senior clients don't have as much time as they used to and are getting overwhelmed with the pressures of their jobs. They're really delegating down brief writing to mid-level clients. We see that a lot, and you know, in the briefs that we've seen, very often they are just asking for either awareness goals, or sometimes, frankly, they don't have goals at all. But that's really now on us to help those mid-level clients look like heroes in their own space and for their own, you know, teams, and elevate the brief to get those KPIs out. So when I talk about the KPI exercise, when I talk about the USP exercise, you know, that's where you want to go to be able to identify those KPIs. And, you know, we'll talk more in some of our other lessons. There, you know, there's homework that you can do even outside of getting input directly from clients. You can go to annual reports, go to the analysis reports. Like, there are places that you can go to understand what those category specific KPIs will be, but that's where you identify those on your own and pull those forward for your clients in kind of what I call a yes and sort of situation. Give those mid-level clients what it is that they're looking for, but build on that, elevate that, and drive them into more of those business-focused metrics.
Awesome. Can my agency ignore the soft metrics? Do strategic agencies who focus on client KPIs no longer present any type of lower-level marketing metrics?
You know, that's a great question as well. The way that we look at this and the way that we've seen now, those soft metrics aren't completely unimportant. They just aren't the means to an end on their own. So you've got to ask, what do they ladder up to? So oftentimes, awareness will help drive a bigger business metric. So you can't ignore those. Obviously, you're not going to sell a product if no one's aware about it, but they're no longer a means to an end. The problem with agencies, as we've seen, is that they start and stop with the lower level metrics. They just don't push past them. So no, certainly don't ignore them, but look at them as a means to an end and not the end result itself.
Okay, great. All right. Does procurement really understand the KPIs of their business, or are they just interested in cutting costs?
No, it's getting to be that they're looking at the value for their investment, and they do understand those metrics. They do understand. That's not just lip service. With all of the procurement execs that we've met with, they deliver on what they say, and it's not just words. They're certainly going to look to cut costs, but we hear firsthand, not at the expense of compromising the business impact.
Great. You mentioned specializing in categories. How do you handle conflicts?
Oh, that's another good one. Okay, so there's I think that this is kind of a good way to state it, but there's a saying in the agency world that I've heard, you know, 2 is a conflict within a category and 3 is a specialties. And there's a certain degree of truth in this. Now, there are going to be some categories that can be subdivided into more specific kind of category adjacents within. You know, some categories have much less restrictions and non-competes than other categories. But frankly, at a certain point, the expertise that you offer within that category is going to trump the non-compete clauses. You know, we think about the business consultancies in today's world, and they have conflicts across the board, but they're able to address that on the upfront, and they've been able to position their experience as such a benefit that clients are willing to come on board. So there is getting to be a little bit of it. 2 is a conflict, 3 is a, you know, an expertise, and we've seen some agencies navigate that very successfully.
Okay. I think we have time for one last question. You say that when procurement wants to remove a line item to remove the deliverable. That sounds good in theory, but does that actually work?
You know, we heard that straight from procurement, that absolutely they will cut until there is a very real cost involved. You know what I mean by cost of, you know, eliminating a KPI, eliminating a benefit. So straight from them, that absolutely works. That was the advice that they gave to us at one of our conferences.
Okay, good to know. So I see that we have just 2 minutes left, so I'm going to selfishly take those last 2 minutes to myself. But first, I do want to say a huge thank you again for Nadine for taking us through this webinar. It's been such a pleasure to listen to you and give us some good points that I think everyone can take back through agencies. But if you by chance didn't get to ask a question, or if a question pops up after this webinar, definitely reach out to us. We're happy to connect you to the Mirror team to get you some good answers if you're looking for some more help from them. They are our thought leaders, so they are here to help. Again, this webinar is part of our agency growth series. Unfortunately, even though this is the last session, we had 3 webinars before, so if you're just jumping in and you're interested to learn more, email us at webinar@aaaa.org or check on our website. You'll see the posting of all the webinars in this series and how you can get access if you missed out. If you want to get access to this presentation, again, the email is on the screen. Feel free to reach out to Alicia and you'll get a copy of the handout. A last friendly request after this webinar will be sending out a survey result. It will take you 2 minutes tops, but we do really appreciate the feedback. It's a chance for you to tell us how we're doing and other topics that you're looking for. So definitely reach out for that. If you have any other questions, let us know. Webinar@aaaa.org. We have tons of great stuff coming up, the last few months left in this year, and some awesome stuff happening in the new year. So definitely check out our site. Thank you again, Nadine, for being here with us. It was fantastic to have you.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.